Okay. Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, so now do
Okay,
slideshow from
there we
beginning.
go. Thank you for your patience.
Okay.
All right, let's see if this works. Okay, there we go. We're looking at Thomas Edison's family here. Now, Thomas had two wives, Mary Stillwell Edison and Mina Miller Edison. Of his six children, as you can take a look at the family tree, only Madeline had children. Interestingly, both of Thomas's wives gifted him with a daughter first, followed by two sons. During my tours, all the questions about the Edison children is why I have taken on this topic. And we're going to start at the beginning. You can see that the Edison children had very different childhoods. The home on the left is where the early childhoods of Thomas's first three children, Marion, Thomas Jr., and William, grew up in Menlo Park, New Jersey. It's a picture of their home in 1880. Madeline, Charles, and Theodore lived a much more luxurious life at Glenmont in West Orange, New Jersey. So not only did they differ in economic status, but also in social status. So these kids grew up very differently. You can see the Menlo Park, New Jersey laboratory that Thomas Edison built, his very first research laboratory of fame, not his very first, but his first one of fame. And this is where Thomas Edison built his reputation as the Wizard of Menlo Park, inventing the phonograph there, perfecting the incandescent light bulb, and courting suitors to finance his first power plant in Manhattan. All took place from that building right there. Now, the second set of Edison's children experienced a much different childhood with the massive industrial complex you see on the right, Edison's West Orange, New Jersey facilities, which included manufacturing, laboratory, research, and development. So a much different picture between the two childhoods. Now, Mary Stillwell Edison was Thomas's first wife. There's many different stories on how they met. So I chose to use Mary's story herself. Mary was a schoolgirl of 15 at the time of their first meeting. She said she was tall for her age. She met Edison by chance when she took refuge in one of his factories during a rainstorm. She noticed Edison for two reasons. He had very handsome eyes and he was so dirty, all covered with machine oil. Edison walked her home, visited with her family. At first, Mary was the reluctant object of his affection, but with her father's permission, they began courting in the spring of 1871, eventually being married on Christmas Day that year. She was 16, he was 24. Now I'm going to quote Mary word for word on the story of how the Edisons met. This was found in a newspaper article written by Olive Harper, the New York Weekly World, June 1st, 1884. I'm going to quote Mary now. The fact is just this. I was going home from school one afternoon with two of my companions when it began to rain furiously, and none of us had an umbrella, so we stepped into the hallway of what proved to be Mr. Edison's factory, where he was then making stock recorders. A gentleman who we knew came out and invited us inside, and we went in to be out of the rain. I was about 15 and a half years old and was tall for my age. Mr. Edison was at work on one of his machines, and this gentleman who we knew showed us around, and I noticed Mr. Edison particularly for two reasons. First, I thought he had very handsome eyes, and next, because he was so dirty, all covered with machine oil, I spoke to him about the machine he was working on. We talked a few moments, and as the rain kept up and even grew worse, we concluded it was best to go home. The gentleman brought his umbrella and took my two schoolmates, and Mr. Edison got his and started to accompany me, first pulling on an overcoat that hid his dirty clothes. When we got to the house, I saw that he was determined to go in I had to invite him in, and when my mother came down, she asked who that was. I told her and said that he had brought me home, and she went in, as I was in mortal terror lest she ask him to stay. But she did, and then he got up and took off his overcoat and stayed until 9 o'clock. And then, when he went away, he asked permission of my mother and myself to call again. When we got it, he availed himself of it to come almost every evening. And at last, after 5 months of constant visiting, he made his proposal in this way, which I tell you because it is so perfectly his way of doing everything. We have been walking out and were coming home when he said, "Have you ever thought that you would like to be married, Mammy?" "Why, no," I replied, "not yet, anyhow." "Well, I have, and I would like to, and I would like you for my wife." "Oh, I couldn't," I answered. "Well, why not? Don't you like me well enough? Think now, and try not to make a mistake." I stammered out something about the suddenness of it and that I couldn't marry so young, but he said, if you meant no, you would say no. So now I'll see your father tomorrow night, and if he says yes, we will be married Tuesday. This was Saturday. Sunday, he talked with father and mother and wanted to be married at once. But father said he would give him an answer within a week. Mr. Edison took my hand and said, "I love your daughter, and I'll make her a good husband. I am honest, and I am good, and I know how to treat a woman. I'll come next Sunday night." He did, and father had, in the meantime, satisfied himself that he need have no fear, and so we were married, and I have been very happy with him, and I expect to be as long as I live, for he is good and true and so tender to me and the children. So that's Mary's version of their courtship. And I have no reason to not take Mary's word at this point. I've heard many different versions. They only met for 3 weeks. Mary was not happily married, but a direct quote from her in this interview, she says otherwise. So I'm sticking with that. Now, notice that poor Mary dies August 9th, 1884. At age 29, and this interview was June 1st, 1884. So just 2 months before Mary died is when she gave this interview to Olive Harper. So Mary's death, here's her obituary. She died in August 1884, and the obituary is pretty lengthy. I've read it. You can look this up. It's in the New York World, August 17th, 1884. Mary had aspirations of being a writer. She also had aspirations of publishing a novel, and Olive Harper says she read some of Mary's work and thought she was worthy of publishing. So that's just a couple side notes about Mary. Mary was a good mother to her children, and the children were devastated when she died. As a matter of fact, Thomas Edison was also. He came out to Menlo Park for the last days of her life. She was sent there to recover from their home in Manhattan. And according to this obituary, and again, this is only according to this obituary, Thomas Edison even tried to electrically shock his wife back to life after she died, to no avail. So he was devastated by Mary's death, and that led to the traumatization of her children. Now, she had 3 children. Her daughter, Marion, firstborn. Marion was born 1873, and she lived a very long life. She died April 16th, 1965. Marion was kind of shuffled around after her mom's death. In 1881, she was going to Miss Graham's School for Young Ladies. You can see she switched schools. A year later, she went to another school, a French academy for young ladies and gentlemen in Manhattan. 1883, she went to Madame Mears Boardings and Day School for Girls on Madison Avenue, New York, New York. Marion left school with no explanation in 1886 to join the marriage party in Fort Myers. And as a matter of fact, there were letters written to Thomas Edison insisting that his daughter come to school or she would be disqualified of being able to go to the boarding school. Letters which Edison was too busy to answer. So Marion became his sidekick, if you will, and she was very involved in the courtship of Mina with her father. In 1887, after Thomas had married Mina, the decision was made for her to go to Bradford Academy in Bradford, Massachusetts. So she went to 5 schools in a 6-year span, 5 different schools. Now, here's a letter from Marion to her dad. She was 22 years old, April 28th, and this was after a lengthy trip in Europe. She spent 2 years traveling around Europe, going through an $80 a month allowance with Mina's sister, Jenny. They toured Europe. She came back briefly and then decided that she wanted to remain over in Europe. And she eventually became engaged to a man, Oscar Oser. I do hope that you can come to our wedding. I would so like you to know my Oscar, for you would be sure to like him, for everyone does. Please come, Papa, for I would so like to see you again, for once I am married and settled so far away from you, there is very little hope of my returning home. So you can see that Marion's very concerned that Thomas and Mina come to her wedding, 1895. And unfortunately, that did not happen. Instead, Thomas sent over Tom Jr. to the wedding. He spent 2 days, walked his sister down the aisle, and then came back to the United States. Marion described her stepmother as too old to be her friend and too young to be her mother. So there was a little bit of a rift between Marion and Mina. Of course, Mina, only 20 years old when she met Thomas and married him, created a little competition between the two of them. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Marion also in 1916, after she married Oscar, wrote home. After months of silence, I was happy to get a sign of life from home. Your Christmas greetings and letters made me more happy than you can think. Letters are all I have to brighten me up. If those I hoped from do not come, then I begin to worry. There is no doubt that letters do get lost, and it's just that which makes me worry. Well, I would just like to know what doesn't worry me. These days, it seems to me that more of us are normal. It is just as if our nerves are on the outside of our skin. So this was during the war years over in Europe. Marion married to a German officer, Oscar Oser, and she was kind of isolated over there in Europe during World War I. The only picture I could find of Carl Oscar Oser is this picture that Marion sent home on a postcard, again, asking her father when he could come over to visit them. And she points Oscar out there with a little arrow. He's standing in the middle of the picture in an officer's uniform. This is the only picture I can find of her husband, Oscar. Oscar was, maybe you would describe him as a player in today's terms. It was not a happy marriage, especially during the war. Oscar did cheat on Marion and treated her very poorly, which led to them ultimately getting a divorce. And Marion came back home after she divorced her husband. She had a long life in Connecticut. She had a trailer in Connecticut and later a home, and Marion left a very good legacy. Now, Marion and Mina seemed to patch things up, but according to Marion, at age 81, when she wrote a letter to her friend Elizabeth, she stated, "I do not feel very much like dying, but someone on the highway may bump into me before nightfall, and that would end on the whole a happy life. The only real troubles were having a stepmother and getting smallpox at 16. Both were real afflictions." So unfortunately, Marion and Mina never could get along, and Marion felt very traumatized by her father's remarriage to Mina. Now, Marion did leave a great legacy behind. So Marion was very politically inclined. She knew that her father's legacy needed to be protected. She left 1/3 of her estate to the Newark Hospital, 2/3 to the Edison Foundation, which she started, and 13 personal bequests ranging anywhere from $10,000 down to $3,000. So Marion left all of her funds behind, much of it for the public and a few for her personal friends. So Marion lived a long life, and her and Mina did. I don't want you to think that they were not friendly, because Marion would go to Christmas at Glenmont from Connecticut, and she would spend time with Mina there. Although whatever resentment she harbored came out in the letter later on in her life after Mina's passing. Now that brings us to Thomas A. Edison Jr. He, named after his father, grew up bouncing around from Menlo Park to Manhattan, back to Menlo Park. He also went to Mademoiselle's French Academy for young women and gentlemen. He actually attended that with his sister. Once Thomas married Mina, who took over the education of Thomas's children, lucky for them, he went to the Dearborn Morgan School in West Orange, New Jersey. That was a K-8 school, and after finishing there, he went to St. Paul's in Concord, New Hampshire, a very prestigious private school. Now, you notice that the Edisons before Mina grew up in Menlo Park, New Jersey, just a small farming community, and they didn't have much of an education early on in childhood, especially when it comes to social issues. They grew up isolated in Menlo Park. And here's a quote from Thomas about his son. "I never could get him to go to school or work in the laboratory. He is therefore absolutely illiterate scientifically and otherwise." So that was a quote from Thomas Edison about Tom Jr. And once they went to St. Paul's, Tom and his brother both went there. They were not happy there. All they wanted to do was come home. This is a letter from 14-year-old Tom Jr. to Mina in 1890. He was so homesick the other day that I went up in my room and cried as hard as I could, and I don't feel a bit homesick today. I have every lesson perfect this week except my arithmetic, which stood 38 out of 45. Well, Mama, I guess I will close now with much love to you, Papa, and Pete. So this is Thomas at age 14, letting them know he wasn't really enjoying St. Paul's. Here's another letter, 1892, when stating why Thomas Jr. would quit school. He had a great many reasons why I am so discontented here, so many that it is very hard to tell them all. I've highlighted the significant parts of this letter. I have tried over and over again to be popular with the boys and masters, but failed in every attempt. I would give worlds to know what I have done to them, because it is now time I should be correcting myself of the wrong which I have bestowed upon them. That is one of many reasons why I'm so discontented here. So at age 17, Thomas Jr. quit high school and went to work for his father. He went to work for him in Ogden, New Jersey at the iron ore mine. Not for very long, though. In 1897, Tom Jr. couldn't take working at the iron ore mine. He and his father never really got along. And you can see Tom Jr., very afraid to approach his father, wrote his resignation letter instead of face to face. Quote, as I have not the ability to talk to you in person as I would like to, and as in this instance, I feel I should be understood perfectly, I take the liberty of writing knowing I could express myself more clearly to you. Perhaps you already know that it is my intention not to return to Edison. So Tom Jr., 1897, not quite 20 years old, I believe, at the time, decides to go off on his own and start his own business dealings. These are some of the products that the Thomas A. Jr. Improved Incandescent Lamp Company and the Thomas A. Jr. Chemical Company put out. They put out the Electromagno Vitalizer or Magno Electric Vitalizer, the Wizard ink tablet. You see a picture of young Tom Edison Jr. there, looking pretty dapper, somewhere in New Jersey. And all of these business opportunities became a problem for him because while they advertised these products to work, actually none of them really worked that well at all. And that did not set well with Thomas Edison Sr. You can see the Thomas A. Edison Jr. Chemical Company, a group of investors that were pretty much capitalizing off of Thomas Edison Jr.'s name. Now, that led to a lawsuit between Thomas A. Edison and Thomas A. Edison Jr. Chemical Company. I found this in the archives at Rutgers, the Edison papers. The lawsuit really stated that Thomas A. Edison was suing his son for using his patented name, Thomas A. Edison. So Edison actually patented his own name. His company was the Thomas A. Edison Incorporation, and now he felt like his son was taking advantage of his father's name with nefarious business products. And he eventually did win that lawsuit, and Thomas A. Jr. briefly did change his name to Burton Willard. Eventually, he took his name back. But just to give you an example of the relationship, Thomas Sr. had William, Thomas's little brother, write him a letter in 1898. Father wishes for me to say in answer to your letter that he does not want you to go around the country using his name as a drawing card, and if you attempt to do so, he will send a lawyer in to stop it. The old man says that he is through with you and that you have disgraced him enough. Also, he says that you are in debt, and furthermore, that you have married this actress he don't care so much for. That as the way you have treated him and lied to him. Sorry he has so bad an opinion of you, trusting you are much better. So this is a letter from William to Tom warning him to stop using the family name as a calling card. Something that William himself would get in trouble for later on. Now, Tom Jr., you see the lawsuits as they showed up in the papers. We have it in the Morning News, the New York Tribune. Edison Jr. sells his name again, more fraud orders. So the Post Office Department barred his company from using the mail to do business. And you can see these are some of the lawsuits as they were written up in the paper. So this was a time when Edison's name was being muddied. And you can see 1903, 1904. So the lawsuit took several years to settle, finally ending all these headlines. So this was kind of sullying the Edison name. Very concerning for Mina and Thomas. Now, Charles, Thomas's brother, stepbrother. Did I have that right? Stepbrother, yes. Well, half brother, I guess that would be the better way to put it. He actually took Thomas Jr. into the company fold after his dad died. And unfortunately, Tom Jr. only lived another 3 to 4 years after his father died, but Charles gave him a spot on the company, and the company wrote a beautiful obituary for Thomas Edison Jr. And it was ediphoned by Nelson C. Durand, Vice President and General Manager, Thomas A. Edison, Inc., Ediphone Division. So you can see Thomas did get back and work for the family business briefly after his dad died. He would have to wait till his dad's death before he would get into the company. And it says right here, it's a very beautiful obituary, Tommy's last job. Few in our commercial family knew Thomas A. Edison Jr., living in the shadow of his famous sire, yet gifted with his talents. He never emerged into the light of power and position through loyalty and an overwhelming modesty. Tommy, as we affectionately knew him, did his last engineering work for the Ediphone with the approval of all who attended the 58th anniversary celebration. This was his swan song of invention. Our organization will long remember him by his technical contributions, and his close friends at Orange will cherish the memory of a sweet, kindly soul who lived and died, contented to be junior to a father he idolized. And I thought that last statement there really sums up. Tom Jr. only wanted his father's approval during life. When he couldn't get that, unfortunately, he turned to other means to achieve the happiness in his life. Unfortunately, he died very young. He had struggled with alcohol and drug abuse throughout his life. He was down here in Fort Myers to dry out during the 1890 eras, at the late 1890s, turn of the century, when Thomas and Mina weren't here. So Tom Jr. will always be in the shadow of his father. God bless him. That's all I can say for him. Now we will go to William Edison. This was Thomas's youngest with Mary. William Edison went to St. Paul's with his brother. He also went to Dearborn Morgan School, 2 years younger than Thomas. He also lived a short life. He eventually married Blanche Travers. He also served in the military during the Spanish-American War and also during World War I. He went to J.M. Hawkins School in Staten Island, and he 2 years went to Yale University. Didn't graduate from Yale. Now, just like his brother, he was really wanting to get out of St. Paul's. They just didn't fit in there with the wealthy elite of their times, having grown up in the shadows of Menlo Park. I've just got your letter, oh mama, and don't want to come home so soon. Can't I stay all summer? This is a letter where he was shipped off or sent off to his uncle's house, William Pitt Edison. Can I stay all summer? It is so nice on the farm now. I take a lesson every day. Our school is under a very large apple tree. It is so cool. I will try to write a better letter next time. I send Mama and Papa 10 kisses. Uncle and Auntie send love to all. Goodbye, Mama, from your son, William Edison. So this is just a couple months after Thomas had married Mina. Mina let the children go to Uncle Pitt's for the summer so she could get used to her new life at Glenmont in West Orange, New Jersey. Once he came home, of course, he would go to St. Paul's, and he had the same result at St. Paul's that his brother did. They hated it there. May I come home and go to a public school or any school near home? I can't stand it up here. He found a school in Trenton, New Jersey, which he would have liked to go to. he quoted as saying, "I would go through that school without uttering a word, but I cannot stay here. I have no boyfriends up here and don't want to have. Do not send Thomas back under any price. I hope he shall be better at work than up here." So this was after his brother Thomas quit. William was left behind all by himself and started to ask for permission to get out of St. Paul's. And they did allow him to go to school on Staten Island, J.M. Hawkins School. So he did go from St. Paul's to J.M. Hawkins, and later he would go to Yale, not finishing at Yale. So that's his education. Now, of course, William would serve in the military. In 1899, though, he was already starting to have his own businesses. He had many different businesses. He tried to sell Edison phonographs. He tried to sell Edison products. Not the most talented businessman. This is a letter from Thomas to William in 1899. And dear Will, I beg to enclose you herewith checks as follows. So these are the debts that he was rolling up with no money to pay. I send you the above check to pay the debts you enumerate. Every few weeks I get a letter from you stating that you have made a fool of yourself. What is the use of going right along month after month making a fool of yourself? Try the other tack for a month or so and see how it feels. I am very much displeased that you're borrowing money from Conley. Yours truly, Thomas Edison. So this is Thomas helping William make ends meet in 1899. This is a 1903 letter from Thomas to William. And this was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back in their relationship. You have now done just what I told you not to do. By organizing this company, you're now doing me a rash injury, because every automobile company will now believe that I am interested in manufacturing automobiles and will fight shy of batteries. You are being used for your name like Tom. As you seem to be a hopeless case, I now notify you to go your own way and take care of yourself. You can draw the balance I promised you and hereafter receive no money from me. So this is Thomas's final warning to his son William in 1903. William had started a car company. You can see right here in 1907, William loved cars and he wanted to sell them. And he went in business right here in Delaware. And everywhere the Edison children went, the newspaper headlines followed, right? So the wizard's son to locate here. This was big news in Wilmington, Delaware. He was representing the Prainter motor car, a machine constructed by an Indianapolis firm, which is said to be one of the best on the market. Although I am my father's son, says Edison, I do not travel on my father's name. My motto is that every tub should stand on its own bottom. So this was a quote that William felt compelled to give the newspaper, probably to ensure his father that he wasn't trying to use his dad's name. And that business didn't last very long. As a matter of fact, 10 years later, William joined the war effort during World War I because of some financial problems. You can see right here a letter from William to Thomas in 1917, where William is trying to pay his father back, can't make the payments, and is asking him to cut the payments from $25 a week to $15. Now, unfortunately, William says his wife is suffering, wasting away for lack of proper attention. The doctors have ordered what to me is an impossibility. So he's trying to take care of his sick wife, trying to pay back his father. He's working for the Wantnong Tractor Company in Morristown, New Jersey. So just another one of his business businesses that he was involved in. And when that didn't work, he finally joined the war effort in 1918. He wrote the Edisons and said that he had was recruited to be in the Army. He ended up as supervisor in a tank division in Europe. Now, William was still trying to use his dad's name, because this is a letter he wrote to his father begging him to get him out of the Army after he was stationed in Europe. I wish that you would write to Washington and ask for my discharge. I have accomplished what I set out to do for my company. I have served my country in 2 wars, and a long continuation of my stay over here is detrimental to my health under conditions enacted of an enlisted man. So he asked him, I have fulfilled my obligations to my country, and I now ask you to use your influence to get me home. My physical condition is not satisfactory at all, and I would prefer to come home on the outside and not on the inside of a box. So William, not happy over in France, wanted to get home. And here's his obituary. He died August 9th, 1937. Believe he was 58 years old. He was sick at the time and could not be saved. So just a few years after Thomas, 6 years after his dad died, William died also. So that gets us to Mina Miller Edison, Thomas's second wife and the second half of the house divided. Mina and Thomas were introduced in Boston, 1865, at a dinner party at his best friend Ezra Gilliland's home. He courted her for a year, and within that time frame, after proposing to Mina, legend has it he tapped it out in Morse code in her hand because of his lack of hearing. Mina responded, if you can get my father's permission. And here's the letter that Thomas Edison sent to Mina's father. Keep in mind, he was 38 years old. Mina was just turning 20. And this was his way of asking permission. Now, the part I have highlighted is interesting to me after hearing Mary's version of their courtship. That Thomas writes, that admiration has on my part ripened into love, and I asked her to become my wife. She has referred me to you, and our engagement needs but for its confirmation your consent. I trust you will not accuse me of egotism when I say that my life and history and standing are so well known as to call for no statement concerning myself. By this time, Edison was the world famous electrician that had powered up Manhattan and many other cities. I do not deny that your answer will seriously affect my happiness, and I trust my suit may meet with your approval. Very sincerely yours, Thomas Edison. Lewis Miller ultimately gave Thomas permission to marry Mina. They were married in Akron, Ohio, February 24th, 1886, and they honeymooned right here in Fort Myers, March 15th of that year. So Mina also had 3 children, daughter Madeline, followed by Charles and Theodore. And the second 3 Edison children lived a much different life than the first 3. Mina was very involved with their childhood and ensured that they had good education and a very moral upbringing. Mina's family, a wealthy family from Akron, Ohio, devout Methodist, and very concerned with family. She had 11 siblings, well, she was one of 11 children, and they were a very supportive family. And these Charles, Theodore, and Madeline really spent a lot of time with Mina's family, Chautauqua Institute on Lake Chautauqua, New York. They spent summers there. They would often be supported by Mina's mother, Mary Belinda, and her father, Louis. Madeline was the first She was born 1888 and she died 1979. So she lived a very long life, and she married John Sloan in 1914, an airplane manufacturer from Plainfield, New Jersey. She went to the Dearborn Morgan School like her other siblings, first through eighth grade. Her and Charles were very close. They went to the Dearborn School together. And then she went to Oak Place High School in Akron, Ohio, under the tutelage of the Miller family. So she spent her high school years with Mina's family in Ohio. She also would come down here in the wintertime during her high school years with friends from the Akron place, the Oak Place School. Eventually, she would go to college, Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. She did not finish there, but she got everything she could out of it. And that is a quote from Madeline. She felt like she had finished her time at Bryn Mawr. Back then, finishing college, not as big of a deal as it is today. Madeline was very well educated, and she was very positive with her goals in life. Now, this is an essay she wrote about her father when she was in the, school around 1900. So she was about 12 years old when she wrote this essay. And this is a good description of her relationship with her dad. Father as a Parent by Madeline Edison. Not severe, but I should not say that he was easygoing either. He set pretty high standards, and he rather expected his children to live up to these. I don't think he actually ever coerced us into doing anything, but we were told in no uncertain terms what he thought about it, and their nature was allowed to take its course. But such was the strength of his personality that we almost always abided by his judgment, and he was almost always right. We had an enormous respect for him, and a word of approval meant more to us than any coercion could have done. On the other hand, it took guts and a lot of courage to disagree with him. So Thomas Edison, much more present in Madeline's life than in Marion, Thomas, and Williams. Remember, he was now an established businessman, coming home every night, spending time with his family, so they got a little bit more of his time than the first three. Madeline was married to John Sloan, and unlike Marion's German wedding, where only Tom Jr. showed up, Madeline had a very beautiful wedding in West Orange, New Jersey at Glenmont. This is a picture of Madeline's wedding picture that was published in the New York Times. There is a copy of the invitation. So her wedding, much different than Marion, who was with mostly strangers in Germany. Madeline was married in New Jersey with some of the elites of the business community attending her wedding, including Henry Ford and his wife, Clara. Madeline left behind a huge legacy. She was a lifelong Republican. She briefly ran for Congress in 1938 as a reformer, which was really gutsy in 1938 for a woman to run for Congress. During World War II, she gave much of her time to blood drives for the New Jersey Red Cross. Madeline was the only Edison child to give Thomas and Mina grandchildren. She had 4 boys, and the Sloan name is still, their legacy is still going on today. She died in 1979, leaving an endowment to the Edison birthplace. So she also, like her sister, half-sister Marion, concerned about her father's legacy. She administered to the Edison birthplace in Milan, Ohio after her mom's death. So Madeline remained involved in her father's legacy. Charles Edison, the middle child with Mina, was the son Thomas always wanted. He spent much of his childhood and his free time as a teenager hanging around his father's West Orange laboratory. He was earmarked by his father to be executive head of Edison Industries. So Charles, from the very beginning, had a great relationship with his father. He talked about his childhood at Glenmont and his biography, semi-autobiography, Out of the Shadows. And if you're interested, look that book up. It's very good, and it gives you Charles' perspective on his childhood. He also went to Dearborn Morgan School. Then he went to Carteret Academy and then Hotchkiss School, which was a prep school to prepare him to go to MIT in Massachusetts. So Charles, very highly educated. He did not finish at MIT because his father wanted him to jump right into the business. This was during World War I, and Charles was being groomed to run the company. They felt like 2 more years at MIT weren't needed for him to run the business. He should get his experience engrossed in the business. So Charles did, and he was very involved in the Thomas A. Edison Corporation. You can see Charles had a very successful life. He was Department of the U.S. Navy from 1937 to 1940, briefly the Secretary of Navy. He was also governor of New Jersey. He merged his father's company in 1957 with McGraw Edison. They became the McGraw Edison Company. Charles navigated that, which was a beautiful financial windfall for the family. 1959, Charles sold all shares to McGraw Electric. So in 1959, Charles ended Thomas A. Edison Corporation. He retired. He lived at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, where he struck up a friendship with Herbert Hoover, who also lived there. In 1962, Edison was the founder of the Conservative Party of New York State. So he remained involved in politics throughout his life. He also was here for the grand dedication and opening of the museum here in Fort Myers, 1966. Charles opened the Museum of Science in honor of his father right here in Fort Myers. He also, you can see this is a letter from Charles. I want to give you just an idea of his relationship with his father. So this was from Charles to Thomas. And in this letter, he lays out the reasons that the company should stop making radios. It also implies brother Theodore's involvement in the decision. So Charles was very involved in the running of the business, but every decision that he made, he continued to run by his father, even into Thomas Edison's later years. 1930, just a year before Thomas died, Charles was still letting his father know how he was running the company. Now, he started the Charles Edison Fund. We were very grateful for that. It was to maintain the legacy of his father, Thomas Edison, and to meet his own philanthropic goals in good and bad economic times. Charles was very civically minded, as was his mother, Mina, Madeline, and Theodore. So they had a totally different outlook thanks to Mina's concerns about the family name. And what is now the Charles Edison Fund was incorporated by him on March 3rd, 1948 as the Brooke Foundation. His choice of the name was prompted by his recollection of a Sunday school song from the days of his childhood. So there's his obituary. A former governor remembered. Charles Edison left behind a legacy in New Jersey. I would also want to point out, before he died in 1969, he made a final appearance here in Fort Myers and crowned the king and queen of the Edison Festival of Lights. So Charles Edison remained a visitor here in Fort Myers right up till the latter years of his life. And it is never easy for a son to shine in the bright light of a famous father, but Charles Edison did. He was former governor of New Jersey, briefly the Secretary of Navy in the cabinet of Franklin D. Roosevelt. So Edison Charles left behind a huge legacy for posterity, right? He left his parents' entire estate in New Jersey to the federal government. He left his dad's property where the laboratories and industrial complex were to the federal government, and it is now the Edison National Historical Site under the Department of the Interiors and National Park Service. So good job by Charles, leaving a legacy for all of us to learn about some of the most important facts of his father's life. Theodore, the final Edison children, also a very brilliant scientist. He went to the Haverford School, a little different from his siblings, Montclair Academy and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He lived a very long life, 1898 to 1992. So he was 94 years old when he died, and his wife, Anna Marie Osterhout, they were happily married for their entire life once they got together from 1925. We have some pictures of Theodore swimming in the pool here in Fort Myers. There's a picture of Theodore at Glenmont with his father in one of their electric cars. Here's Thomas with Mina and Theodore right here on our property in Fort Myers. So there's a lot of pictures of Theodore because he had a charmed life. He was almost like an only child, so much younger than his older siblings that Thomas Edison, now in semi-retirement mode, could spend much more time with Theodore. Theodore was highly educated. He did graduate from MIT, and he ran his dad's research and development for the Thomas A. Edison Corporation until 1931, when he resigned. Theodore and Charles had a little bit different business philosophy, as he let Charles know he wanted to not lay off the workers during the Depression and continue to pay them full salary. But when he resigned on good terms. And this is a letter he wrote on April 5th, 1931. Theodore did it the right way. He let his mom know he was leaving the company. He also let his dad know he was leaving the company, and he attached a copy of the memorandum that he wrote to Charles a few days ago. It is self-explanatory, but in this letter, he ensures his father that he will not in any way damage the family name. Every precaution will be taken to see that our new little company, Calibron Products Inc., brings financial losses to no one, and you need have no fear of any abuse of the name Edison. So Theodore, very aware of his dad's territorial thoughts, ensuring him that he would never interfere with his dad's company. And this was his resignation letter to Charles on April 1st, 1931. Up to the present time, I've had so many worries that they have a great effect upon my health. These worries are not yet all over by any means, but as soon as I started taking definite steps to organize this business venture, some of them disappeared, and I began to get back some of encouragement I had at Tech. I have noticed a marked improvement in my health in the few weeks that I have gained 10 pounds. All this leads me to think that this step is justified, and in fact, the only thing to do under the circumstances. So he's just letting his brother know, no hard feelings. I'm going to start my own company. Good luck with your company. So Theodore was the final Edison child, and he had 89 of his own patents. He worked with radio and research. He definitely formed a successful company in March 10th, on the 10th of March, 1931 is when he started Calibron. And Theodore was the end of the legacy of the Edison family name. So when he died at age 94, that was the last of Edison's children that bore the Edison last name, and there are no other descendants that have Thomas Edison's last name directly descended from him. I should make that distinction there. He was the youngest of 3 children born to Thomas and Mina. His brother Charles was the former governor of New Jersey. Theodore graduated from MIT in 1923 with a degree in physics. Upon his father's death, Theodore assumed control of the Edison Industries research laboratories. He subsequently established his own research laboratory, Calibron Industries. So you can see the last surviving of Thomas Edison, Theodore Edison, died at age 94. So that is the story on the Edison children. There's a picture of Theodore, one of the latest pictures I could find. This was in 1993 in a news press article locally here, Fort Myers News Press, with family members, John Sloan, Ted Sloan, Ann Edison, Charles Edison, Madeline Edison Sloan, and Carolyn Hawkins Edison. This is where I got all my information from, and I hope you guys have a great day.